Thank you for tuning in to Chapter 17 of the Real Enough series, Control+Alt+Delinquents. First of all, I wanted to apologize to anyone who was waiting patiently for the next chapter to come out. I had gotten sick last month and it affected my ability to continue the audiobook. I intend on getting right back at it to keep the entertainment going, and I'm so glad you are all with me and enjoying the story. Once this audiobook is completed, I will work on finishing the sequel to the novel as soon as possible. In the meantime, I intend on writing short stories of various genres to keep everyone entertained and having fun while I finish the sequel to the Real Enough series. At this point, I will happily take suggestions and ideas for short stories in both the horror and science fiction genres. So please leave some comments and I promise I will read them. Thank you for being a fan and for your support. I now present to you Chapter 17 of Control+Alt+Delinquents. After hours of meticulous installation, Keith had finally finished building his new computer, but just as he was about to bask in the glory of his accomplishment, his best friend Jack began to bicker at him once again for every little hiccup that came up. The light is there on the motherboard to tell you what the problem is. Can't you just consult the manual and figure it out? Jack scoffed. Keith let out a sigh. I wouldn't have to read through a manual if my mom would just let me buy a pre-made gaming computer instead of making me build one from scratch. Meanwhile, Nettie sat on the bed in their shared room and observed her brother and his friend with an amused smile. Keith turned to her with a question. Nettie, why is the light yellow? Jack couldn't resist making a snarky comment. Because someone probably peed on it. Nettie shook her head, but before she could explain, Keith's frustration spilled out. You know I can't ask for your help either. Mom said only you or Candace can assist me. No automatic lookups. As Keith tried to troubleshoot the problem on his own, Nettie scrolled through funny YouTube videos on the television in the corner. Finally, Keith attempted to turn on the computer again, hoping to at least see the BIOS system pop up this time. We have bigger problems than that anyway, Jack chimed in, causing Keith to kneel down and examine the tower of his new computer more closely. But after powering it on, all they heard was a beep and nothing showed up on screen. Taking a deep breath, Keith looked at Jack with defeat. Yeah, I know. Chris made a copy of the SSD drive when Angelica stole it from my room. He's probably decoding it right now. But what are the chances of him actually decoding it? Keith looked over at Nettie for her opinion. Nettie mirrored her brother's deep breath, a habit she had picked up from him. Do you want me to fill your entire garage up with answers to your every question? 2 petabytes only goes so far. Nettie winked at Keith and grinned while shaking her head no, simultaneously. I thought it was 1.5 or something? Keith asked. Nettie shrugged her shoulders and smiled at him cutely. Mom upgraded me the other day after the fire, Nettie added. Snap out of it, brats. Back to the problem. Jack snapped his fingers between Keith and Nettie's line of sight by leaning over his dead new computer. I think it's the RAM, Keith said. Jack growled through his teeth momentarily. No, that problem, the main problem, Jack corrected. It's not the main board, it's the RAM, Keith said. Eat my ass, Keith, Jack exclaimed. You're ignoring the fact that Chris is probably finding some sly way to decode your hard drive right now. And aside from our super awesome Moonscape VR meshes we were working on, you got files on Nettie, right? Considering you two love each other so much, I figured you'd be more concerned about this than I am. Nettie reached for the remote and turned down the volume on the TV, sitting up on the edge of her bed. She checked her induction glove, relieved to see that it was almost at full charge. I don't think we have anything to worry about, Nettie assured them. Microshaft is known for their advanced encryption methods. It would take millions of years, or an AI even more advanced than myself, to decode the drive. What's Microshaft? Keith asked, confusion evident on his face. You, Jack teased with a smirk. I don't own a company, Keith retorted. Nettie rolled her eyes and launched a rubber band at Jack's head, only to have it get caught in his braided shoulder-length hair. She shot him a glare before turning back to Keith. Either you have a faulty RAM stick, Nettie began, or you just need to rearrange the order of your current ones for the computer to boot correctly. As they were discussing potential solutions, Cassie's voice interrupted from the living room. Nettie perked up with mischievous delight as she heard her mother's admonishment. I only told him after he figured out why it wouldn't boot, Mom. Nettie defended herself with a sly grin. Cassie then poked her head into the bedroom, glancing between Nettie and the 2 human boys. How's your charge? She asked pointedly. Just reached 100%, Nettie replied, removing her glove. Good. Now get out of here and let them learn. Cassie ordered playfully before turning to address the boys directly. And Nettie is right. If Angelica and Chris did return your drive but made copies, it would take them far too long to decrypt it. Miss Cameron, Jack said with a hint of concern in his voice, they'll hold on to that copy until quantum computing becomes a thing, and then Keith and Nettie, along with you, may have some explaining to do. Cassie turned to face him, her hands on her hips in a defensive stance. Well, that's on me, she admitted with a sigh. I should have given this place better security. If Angelica and her friends... F-buddies? Jack interjected, causing Cassie to shoot him a sharp look. Friends with benefits, she clarified firmly before continuing. If they ever manage to find a way to decrypt the drive, we will deal with it, and I'll accept the consequences. Keith, who had been tinkering with the computer while they spoke up with a worried tone. What about Nettie, though? She didn't ask for those consequences. He looked away from the computer screen after trying various fixes and turning it back on again. I can hack into their cloud accounts like it's nothing, Jack boasted confidently, snapping his fingers for emphasis. I can check and make sure they don't have any incriminating evidence on their emails, Google Drives, or anywhere else. Cassie's eyebrows furrowed in concern as she questioned their plan. What about their home computers? Their thumb drives, their local media? Her voice was skeptical, hinting at disapproval. You planning on breaking into their house too? Jack just shook his head, undeterred by her doubts. You're rich, right? He asked casually. Not that it's any of your business, Cassie retorted haughtily, but Jack was already lost in thought, his eyes lighting up with a mischievous glint. Give me an iron rod thicker than both my fists put together, about a mile of copper wire, and a goddamn flux capacitor, and I'll make sure they ain't got shit. Cassie's eyes widened in shock as she realized what he was suggesting. You want to create an electromagnetic pulse? She exclaimed. That's super dangerous, Nettie chimed in, her tone worried. Especially for me. I intend on making it somewhat directional, Jack explained confidently. I can program a special directional finder with my Python skills that could seek out the nearest asshole, and it'll immediately point to Chris, Dean, or Angelica's house. At this, Keith couldn't hold back his laughter. He also managed to start installing Windows on his computer after swapping the RAM as Nettie had suggested. They're not assholes, Cassie defended their friends. They're just young. We're young and we're not assholes, Jack countered, quick to defend himself and his friends. Sometimes you are, Keith interjected playfully. Jack shrugged nonchalantly but held up his hand to admit defeat. He squeezed his fingers together as if to say, maybe just a little bit. Despite their playful banter, there was a sense of camaraderie between the group as they worked towards their goal. Cassie paused before sitting down at the foot of the bed, her eyes scanning over the group of children gathered around her. Her expression was one of deep contemplation as she took in each face before her. Nettie, noticing this, raised a brow and looked between Cassie and Jack and Keith with concern etched on her features. Cassie's brow furrowed suddenly as she bit her lip, her thoughts consumed by the earlier conversation about the EMP. Oh shit, Jack exclaimed, his eyes widening in realization. Keith, confused by the sudden tension in the room, turned to Jack and then to Nettie for an explanation. Did you say something, Mom? He asked innocently. Nettie shook her head at Cassie, silently pleading for her to explain what was going on. Cassie raised her brows again and motioned subtly towards the living room. Jack swallowed hard as he understood what she was trying to convey and followed her out of the room. Nettie stayed behind, casting a worried look towards the door where Cassie and Jack had disappeared. Keith, now alone in his room with only his computer for company, began to feel anxious about not knowing what was happening. He stood up from his chair as the operating system displayed a loading screen and nervously shoved his hands into his pockets. What are they doing? He asked aloud. I don't understand. Nettie shook her head slowly in disbelief as she gazed towards the door where Cassie and Jack had gone off to discuss their plans without involving Keith. What's going on with Mom and Jack? Keith asked again, feeling increasingly left out of whatever was happening. Nettie closed her mouth and finally tore her gaze away from the door to look over at Keith with a sad expression in her eyes. I don't know if you've noticed by now, but your mom has a tendency to favor bold solutions when it comes to major problems, she explained carefully, hoping he would understand. She then gestured to herself and back to him, trying to make her point clear. You being lonely, having the wrong friends, she makes me... It was like trying to push Keith towards an epiphany. He stood there for a moment, his mind working to piece together the clues. And then suddenly it clicked. Nettie could see it in his widened eyes and slackened jaw. So if she's with you, then Jack is with the EMP. Nettie nodded slowly, confirming his suspicions. With a sudden understanding, Keith raised his eyebrows and blinked rapidly. He took a seat next to Nettie on the bed, their hands intertwining in silent support. My mother is a mad scientist, Keith whispered under his breath. The doorbell rang, breaking the quiet moment between them. Nettie got up to check the door, but could only see Jack and Cassie talking in hushed voices outside for privacy. She couldn't hear the doorbell either. It continued to ring insistently as Nettie stood, her programming and processor racing with what she could only describe closely as anxiety. I'll be right back, she promised Keith before leaving him alone in the bedroom. Outside, she could see several people dressed in various stylish ensembles, women in business power suits and men in two-piece suits of different price ranges. But her attention was drawn to Alex Carpenter, standing confidently with a clipboard in hand. Opening the door, Nettie greeted him with a polite smile. Hello, what was your name again? Alex asked, his tone professional yet friendly. Nettie, she replied, meeting his gaze with curiosity. Do you need anything? She couldn't help but feel a bit nervous under his scrutinizing gaze. Nettie, Alex said with a condescending tone, turning slightly to the group of well-dressed HOA board members to make sure they witnessed how he talked to the young girl. She squinted at them as they shared sly smiles, as if plotting some sort of heist. Mom's busy out back. Can I take a message? Nettie asked, her voice filled with annoyance. This is important, and it will only take a moment. Nettie shook her head in frustration. Let her know you're here. Just let her know we're here and have her come out. You can stay inside and let us talk, demanded Alex in a tone that tried to sound polite yet authoritative. Nettie's hand paused on the doorknob, considering whether or not to shut the door in his face. She tilted her head to the side and allowed a half smile to stretch across her face, knowing it would frustrate him. No, I'll be here too, Nettie retorted confidently. Besides, I wanted to make sure my knowledge of law is well practiced because I'm studying for it in preparation for college. Nettie did have a genuine interest in laws, but at the moment she just wanted to see the look on Alex's face as she finally shut the door on him. Nettie opened the sliding glass door and Jack stopped talking immediately. The last words Nettie heard before Cassie stopped replying were about a reusable capacitor, a mile of copper wire, and proper insulation. Nettie knew exactly where that conversation was headed before she interrupted. Mom, Nettie said with annoyance, when you're done discussing destroying half the neighborhood, the HOA wants to talk to you about something. Cassie sighed and looked at Jack, who nodded before walking past Nettie towards Keith. Cassie shook her head in exasperation. It has to be about the house being on fire. Fair bet, Nettie replied, rolling her eyes. They don't know about your plans to take out the power grid next. Cassie couldn't help but stifle a grin as she walked past Nettie. You're coming with me, right? Yeah, I got this, Mom, Nettie said confidently. She was always ready to support her mother and handle whatever chaos came their way. As Nettie and Cassie stepped out of the door, the crisp autumn air brushed against their skin, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Nettie stood tall and crossed her arms, taking up more space than she needed to, as she faced one of the women standing on the doorstep. Cassie, on the other hand, felt small and vulnerable, using the extra space to try and make herself feel more comfortable. Can I help you? Cassie said, trying to sound confident despite her nerves. First of all, one of the women spoke up, I would like to express, on behalf of all of us in the neighborhood, that we are glad last week's fire was superficial and your house was okay. Cassie nodded in gratitude. These are our HOA Board of Trustees, and we want to welcome you to the association. We know you've had your reservations, but due to the fire, we're going to need you on board. Mr. Carpenter motioned to one of the women, a lady in her 40s with a slender build, blonde hair, and piercing green eyes. She straightened her power suit before producing a clipboard. Hello, she introduced herself as Sasha Milton. This is the petition we have which has been sent out to most of the neighborhood and includes a unanimous vote by the trustees requiring you to sign in as part of the HOA. At that point, Mr. Carpenter pulled out an expensive gold pen from his equally expensive suit pocket. He took the clipboard from Sasha and unfolded a document while she handed over a binder filled with HOA regulations. The first thing we're going to need to do is get that car in the garage, Mr. Carpenter stated firmly, and your garage door must be open between 6 in the afternoon and 9 at night, as proof that you're keeping the area clean and orderly. Any projects or items stored in the garage will go against regulations. The car must be parked inside. After what happened last week, I'm sure you understand." Cassie frowned, feeling overwhelmed by all the rules and requirements. "Do I really have to sign all of this? Can't I just clear my garage and park in the driveway?" "Yes," Sasha replied with a hint of impatience. "By signing this petition, you are agreeing to abide by the bylaws of our regulatory authority." Nettie shook her head in disapproval. "Actually, all of this is wrong," she spoke up, ready to challenge the HOA's regulations on Cassie's behalf. Cassie's eyes darted between her daughter and Alex, who shifted his weight uncomfortably. Sasha cleared her throat and leaned down to Nettie, speaking to her in a condescending tone as if she were a small child. Nettie, though only slightly shorter than Sasha, stood her ground with a determined expression on her face. "You may be an 11th grade girl, but understanding laws takes more than just taking classes in school. It's a whole different matter when you actually put them into practice. Trust us, we know what we're doing," Sasha said with forced confidence. Nettie watched as Alex nodded in agreement with the way Sasha was handling her, clearly thinking this would be the end of their conversation. "She really is quite sweet, isn't she?" Alex smiled at Nettie, but it was fake and insincere as he pushed a pen in her general direction. "Actually, it's one thing to claim you're practicing the law when an HOA has no authority over legal matters. And that's exactly what you're trying to do by pressuring my mom into signing that document. You even went as far as saying a petition from the neighborhood makes it true, but that's not how the law works," Nettie argued. "Sweetie," Alex shook his head at her patronizingly, "you don't know what you're talking about. Your mother could have burned down the whole neighborhood last week. This agreement is for the safety of everyone here, and that's why we had a vote." "Once again," Nettie interjected coolly, "your vote doesn't hold any weight." Sasha crossed her arms defiantly. "Then tell us why it doesn't matter if you're so smart." "Don't talk to my daughter like that," Cassie stepped in firmly. "It's okay, Mom," Nettie reassured her, smiling confidently at the group of HOA trustees and Alex and Sasha. "In the state of California, nobody can be forced to join an HOA. It's clearly stated in a law that supersedes your fabricated bylaws, which contain false information about my mom's obligations just because you had a vote." "That's simply not true," Sasha retorted. "I wrote those bylaws myself. And once a vote is cast in the neighborhood regarding health and safety, the agreement has to be signed." "Yes, according to your bylaws," Nettie countered, "but California Civil Code Section 5975 specifically states that my mom is exempt from anything in your bylaws since she was here before the association was even formed. End of story." Nettie couldn't help but grin as she watched their shocked expressions. "I love learning about the law," Nettie exclaimed, jumping up and down excitedly. "I think I might want to be a lawyer someday." She squeaked with joy as she high-fived her mother, who chuckled along with her. As for Alex and Sasha, they were left standing outside with nothing but their pens in hand as both women shut the door in their faces. Alex turned to Sasha, his brow furrowed in frustration. "Any other ideas?" he asked, desperate for a solution. Sasha tilted her head and let out a sigh, her eyes scanning the street ahead as they turned away from the driveway to walk toward the road. "Usually this approach works," she said with a shrug, "especially on single mothers. But this one seems particularly resistant." As they walked away from the house and towards the road, Alex muttered under his breath, "Maybe if we try another angle, catch her on a school day when that little orphan girl isn't around." He paused, his jaw clenching, as he thought of the troublesome child they had encountered inside. "As insufferable as that girl is, I can see why her original parents didn't want her," he spat. "She probably found a way to negotiate her way out of having a goddamn bedtime and they disowned her." His hands trembled as they continued down the road, brainstorming new tactics to convince the stubborn mother to sign their HOA entry form. Cassie reluctantly allowed Keith and Nettie to accompany Jack back to his place, despite Larry's initial hesitation. She had called ahead to ask permission, but the house wasn't quite ready for guests, and she was instructed to use the backyard gate instead. As she arrived, she felt a wave of relief upon seeing Jack's girlfriend, Candace, swimming in the pool. "Hey everyone!" Cassie yelled out, expecting a chorus of excited responses. However, the group of teens fell silent, their behavior seeming odd to her. Shaking it off, she walked over to where their heads were popping up just above the edge of the above-ground pool. "Don't worry," Cassie reassured them with a smile. "It's just coming to talk to you. I know Larry can be shy about letting people into his house." She gestured towards the unkempt yard as evidence that the inside may not be much better. Candace climbed up the ladder and quickly realized why the teens had fallen quiet. Blushing, she stepped back down. "I guess here is good," she said, tapping away on her iPad. "I'll go get those supplies for you, Jack. But make sure Nettie stays far away when we set this thing off." Jack hesitated for a moment before speaking up again. "Are we in trouble, Mrs. Cameron?" Cassie paused, still processing everything that had happened. "I haven't decided yet," she said honestly, "but right now I'm focused on our plan and making sure Nettie's secret stays safe." She pointed to Candace. "Did they explain everything to you? And do you understand that this needs to be kept secret?" Candace nodded her head in understanding, her wet hair sticking to her face. With a nod back at Candace, Cassie continued, "We're going to put this thing together and make sure Nettie's safety is secured. I went through a lot of trouble to bring you into our world," she said, addressing Nettie directly. "I won't let some crazy ex-girlfriend of my son ruin everything just because she's a psychopath." Jack chimed in. "I already checked their cloud accounts. No bulk data has been transferred yet, so it must all be saved on a hard drive at one of their houses. One of us can check their lockers the night we do it too," Candace added. Cassie nodded in approval. "Good thinking, Candace." She then turned to her son. "Nettie will go with whoever decides to sneak onto school grounds. Make sure to lock out the cameras. Nettie can study the security systems at the school to make sure you don't get caught. Your job is to open the lockers of Dean, Angelica, and Chris and erase any evidence with a degausser. This will also keep Nettie safe from any potential danger in the neighborhood when we set off the EMP." "Operation Eat Shit," Cassie declared cheerfully, trying her best to keep her shoulders below the edge of the pool. "I'll take Chris's house." "Angelica's house," Cassie stated confidently. "Candace can use her own backyard as cover to get to Dean's house," she directed towards her son. "And Jack," she pointed to him, "you can stick with Candace and sweep it during discharge to get Chris's house too. Once we hit all 3 locations in the school, Nettie and whoever goes with her will head back here while I meet up with you all at the park. You'll give me the EMPs, and I'll dispose of them properly at work by throwing them into the crusher." With a determined look, Cassie shut off her iPad and walked over to the bench to grab a pool noodle. "In the meantime," Cassie announced as she smacked Keith and Nettie on the head with the pool noodle, "you kids can go to Walmart and buy yourselves some proper bathing suits. You two especially, you freaks." The teens quickly ducked underwater, trying to avoid getting hit by their mother's playful wrath.